For many people, Gothel is one of Disney's most memorable villains, and for good reason. She's elegant, manipulative, strategic, knows exactly how to use words as weapons, and builds a disturbingly realistic psychological control dynamic with Rapunzel. But when you really slow down and look at it carefully, behind that calculated image is a character who makes incredibly flawed decisions. And the more the story expands, the clearer that becomes. In the series Tangled, the series, also known as Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure, which picks up right after the events of the movie, we're introduced to a crucial piece of Gothel's past, her biological daughter, Cassandra. Before kidnapping Rapunzel, Gothel was living with Cassandra, who was still a child at the time. The flashbacks make it clear there was no genuine maternal bond there. Gothel didn't show real affection. She merely tolerated Cassandra. Her priority was never her daughter, it was her own youth. Even back then, Gothel already knew about the magical golden flower, the plant with the power to heal wounds and restore youth. For years, she secretly used it to maintain her appearance. The problem begins when the kingdom discovers the flower and uses it to save the pregnant queen's life. The magic is transferred to the newborn baby, Rapunzel. Once Gothel realizes she's lost direct access to the flower, she quickly figures out that the power now resides in the child's hair. That's when she makes her most drastic decision, kidnapping Rapunzel to continue benefiting from the magic. And this is one of the most revealing moments about her personality. After the kidnapping, Gothel simply abandons Cassandra. She chooses to give up her own biological daughter to secure the possibility of eternal youth. Years later, Gothel keeps Rapunzel isolated in a hidden tower, raising her under the false narrative that she is her real mother. She controls every aspect of the girl's life, feeds her fears, and manipulates her insecurities to make sure Rapunzel never questions the prison disguised as protection. Everything revolves around a single objective, preserving her youth. As Rapunzel grows up, doubts begin to surface. Her curiosity about the outside world intensifies, and Flynn Rider's arrival accelerates that process. Once she leaves the tower, Rapunzel starts noticing contradictions in Gothel's stories and gradually uncovers her true origin. When Gothel realizes she's losing control, she does everything she can to stop Rapunzel from escaping. In the final confrontation, the source of her youth is destroyed. Without the magic in the hair, she instantly reverts to her true age and disappears after falling from the tower. What makes Gothel so striking isn't just her cruelty, but how her choices expose her greatest weakness: a selfish obsession with her own youth. That obsession leads her to abandon her own daughter, kidnap a child, and build an entire life on manipulation, decisions that ultimately seal her downfall. I'm not going to dive deep into the version presented in the books by Serena Valentino, the novels that reimagine the origins of Disney villains. I've personally only read 3 of them, but I know that in Gothel's case, the story involves sisters and multiple sundrop flowers, which would explain how she already knew about the magic before the events of the film. Even though those books are officially licensed by Disney, it's clear that the author builds her own connected universe, linking characters she created and expanding the lore in her own way. So to keep this analysis more objective, let's set the books aside and focus exclusively on what the animated canon shows us. And that's exactly where Gothel's decisions start to look far less intelligent than many people assume. Let's start with the core issue, the golden flower. Gothel discovers a plant with absolute healing and rejuvenating powers. For years, she secretly uses it to preserve her youth. However, the movie never establishes that the flower couldn't be removed from where it originally grew. On the contrary, when the kingdom's soldiers find it, they literally pull it out of the ground, brew it into a tea, and give it to Queen Ariana. The magic still works even after being uprooted. In other words, the flower didn't depend exclusively on that specific location to function. That's where the first obvious flaw in Gothel's plan appears. Instead of removing the plant and hiding it somewhere truly inaccessible, far from the kingdom, far from any traffic, far from any chance of discovery, she leaves it practically within the territory ruled by the king and queen. She kept the secret to eternal youth within reach of a monarchy that was, at that moment, desperately searching for a cure to save their pregnant queen. It was only a matter of time before someone found it. When the guards locate the flower and use it to heal the queen, the magic transfers to the newborn Rapunzel. At that point, Gothel loses direct access to the source of power, and instead of reassessing the situation or looking for a less risky alternative, she makes an even more reckless choice. She sneaks into the castle and kidnaps a royal baby. That's her second major strategic mistake. By abducting the king and queen's daughter, Gothel doesn't just commit a high-risk crime, she turns the entire kingdom against her. Rapunzel wasn't just any child. She was the heir to the crown. The search for her would be massive, relentless, and ongoing. And then comes the third flaw, the place she chooses to hide the princess. If the goal was to disappear with the royal family's only daughter, the logical move would have been to flee far away. Another kingdom, another region, anywhere beyond Corona's immediate reach. Instead, Gothel builds a tower relatively close by. It's not an unreachable cliff at the edge of the world, nor a cave in some unknown territory. It's a tower in the middle of the forest. Isolated, yes, but accessible enough that years later someone like Flynn Rider can stumble upon it by accident. Considering that the kingdom releases lanterns every single year in the hope that the princess is still alive, keeping Rapunzel in the same region is an extremely risky move. Gothel spends years living within the very territory where everyone is actively mourning and searching for the child she kidnapped. Gothel kidnaps Rapunzel with one clear objective: to use the magical hair as a continuous source of youth. But there's a fundamental condition in that plan: the power disappears if the hair is cut. In other words, the magic depends on Rapunzel being alive, healthy, and with her hair intact. Gothel can't just extract the power and move on with her life. She needs the girl well, emotionally stable, and cooperative. And what does she do with this vital source of power? She keeps Rapunzel imprisoned, constantly lies to her, manipulates her, belittles her, and feeds her insecurities. In practical terms, she turns her own survival into an unstable dynamic built on fear. It's an incredibly risky strategy, because any emotional breaking point could push Rapunzel to cut her hair out of impulse or desperation. The goal was to keep the girl close without raising doubts. The logical approach would have been to create a safe, comfortable environment where Rapunzel had no reason to leave. Instead, Gothel makes psychological control her default setting. She constantly repeats that the outside world is cruel, that no one will ever love Rapunzel, that she's too fragile to survive on her own. The problem is that this narrative backfires. The more she restricts Rapunzel, the more her curiosity grows. And there's an even deeper contradiction. Gothel encourages Rapunzel's talents: reading, painting, creativity, quick thinking. She raises a smart, observant young woman capable of noticing inconsistencies. In trying to keep her dependent, she ends up developing exactly the qualities that will help her escape. When Rapunzel meets Flynn Rider, known as José Bezerra in the Brazilian version, she experiences something she never truly received from Gothel: conversation without manipulation. This isn't about the romance itself, but about the way he speaks to her, the direct exchange, the basic respect. Even as a stranger, he doesn't belittle her or treat her as incapable. That contrast makes it clear that Gothel's affection was functional, never genuine. Rapunzel starts realizing that relationships don't have to be built on control. Another major mistake involves birthdays. Gothel could have avoided that subject entirely. Many families don't celebrate birthdays for cultural or personal reasons. It would have been completely believable for Rapunzel to grow up without attaching any special meaning to that date. However, the birthday becomes central to the narrative because of the floating lanterns released every year by the King and Queen of Corona in honor of their lost daughter. For a young woman confined to a tower, seeing those lights appear every single year on her birthday creates an unavoidable connection. There's an intuition guiding her. She feels that something about those lanterns is directly tied to her, and that intuition is strong enough to push her to leave the tower. When she finally reaches the kingdom and witnesses the festival up close, the connection becomes undeniable. She is the lost princess. Gothel had simply changed the birthday she told Rapunzel. That emotional link could have been weakened. The lanterns were released on only one specific day each year. All she had to do was shift the date. But Gothel shows no real concern about that detail. When Rapunzel brings up her birthday, Gothel reacts with near indifference, as if it's just a minor inconvenience. There was also another option Gothel never considered: allowing small, controlled outings. Rapunzel had been missing for 18 years. The chances of someone recognizing her on sight were extremely low. In the film itself, when she walks through the kingdom with Flynn, no one immediately connects her to the lost princess. Gothel could have arranged a single supervised trip into the forest, keeping a safe distance from Corona's center, simply to ease the girl's growing curiosity. Even one carefully planned annual outing might have worked as a pressure release. Instead, Gothel sticks to a rigid routine. Same tower, same narrative, same manipulation. For 18 years, she doesn't refine the plan, doesn't create disguises, doesn't relocate, doesn't test alternatives. She stays locked in the same method, relying exclusively on fear as her tool of control. And there's a final irony. Gothel insists that the world is cruel and that men are dangerous. Yet Rapunzel's journey proves otherwise. Flynn doesn't abuse her, exploit her, or deceive her emotionally. On the contrary, he grows because of her. Gothel claims Rapunzel is fragile, but the very scene where Rapunzel knocks Flynn out with a frying pan already proves her strength, initiative, and independence. Another obvious mistake is how Gothel simply doesn't listen to Rapunzel. There's a crucial moment when Rapunzel tries to explain that a strange man entered the tower and that she managed to subdue him. That's not a small detail. It's a complete breach of the tower's security. Yet Gothel doesn't even let her finish. She assumes, once again, that it's about wanting to leave the tower. She interrupts, dismisses, and turns it into a lecture about obedience. That reaction has immediate consequences. Rapunzel learns that honesty isn't worth it. If her own mother won't listen, the solution becomes hiding information. That's when she asks for the rare paint as a birthday gift, a material that's hard to find and far away, forcing Gothel to leave for days. Rapunzel understands that she'll only get her chance if she creates a convincing distraction, and she does. This flaw is directly connected to how Gothel views young people. Throughout the story, she operates under the assumption that youth equals permanent naivety. And yes, younger individuals can be easier to influence, but underestimating their intelligence is a serious strategic mistake. By treating Rapunzel as eternally fragile, Gothel ignores the fact that she's growing up, developing critical thinking, and starting to connect the dots herself. There's a simple logic here. The tighter the control, the stronger the urge to break free. Rapunzel doesn't leave because of childish impulsiveness. She leaves because she begins to notice inconsistencies. When she meets Flynn Rider, she doesn't follow him recklessly. She sees a real opportunity to understand the world beyond the tower. And let's not forget, she's the one who knocks him out with a frying pan. The idea that she's helpless doesn't even hold up in practice. Through intelligence and observation, Rapunzel uncovers the truth on her own. She connects the lanterns to her birthday, notices the physical similarities between herself and the king and queen, and recognizes the pattern repeating year after year. Gothel had lied about her birth date, the curiosity might still have existed, but it wouldn't have had such a powerful symbolic anchor. The lanterns are released on one specific day. Simply changing that detail would have weakened the emotional connection, or at the very least, allowing a controlled experience outside the tower could have reduced the mystery, showing her ordinary parts of the world, not necessarily the kingdom itself, might have softened the idealized image Rapunzel built in her mind. Another decisive mistake was never relocating. The tower was hidden, yes, but it was still inside the same kingdom. Flynn finds it by accident. That alone proves the hiding place wasn't foolproof. Considering Rapunzel had been missing for 18 years, Gothel could have waited for the situation to cool down and moved to a completely different region, somewhere the lanterns wouldn't even be visible. Entangled. The series, we see that the kingdom of Corona is vast, with territories beyond the capital and even lands outside the kingdom's borders. Gothel wasn't tied to that location in any way. She had already abandoned Cassandra. She had no attachments left. She could have fled to any remote area, far from the annual lantern tradition. That alone would have removed the girl's biggest emotional trigger. In the end, what brings Gothel down isn't just the magical hair. It's Rapunzel's will. The hair is the visible half of the power, but the real strength lies in her curiosity, her courage, and her ability to question. Gothel believed she controlled everything because she controlled the physical space, but she never managed to control what truly mattered: the desire for freedom. And once that desire fully matures, no manipulative speech is strong enough to contain it. If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure to leave a like to support the channel. And now click the video on the end screen. It's the perfect follow-up if you want to keep diving into this topic. I'll see you there.